Hello and good morning to the final day of the International Cryptography Module Conference for 24. With that, we're going to be starting here with Daniel O'Loughlin. He's the Vice President of Engineering at Qualcomm Technologies, and welcome to the stage.
Yeah. Okay, so here, yeah, we're,
Okay.
Here we go. All right, I can get that now. Okay, well, thanks to the program committee for having me out here today. Oops, 1 second here. So yeah, today I'm going to talk a little about vulnerability management, and after I submitted the title, I really kind of regretted that it was around common criteria, but actually it turns out there is a close connection to vulnerability management and a relationship to common criteria, and also to security certification in general, and also best practices, right? So, I'll remind the audience that I've been speaking at, ICMC, ICCC, CyberAx conference, a number of venues where, I'm talking about best practices for security development, and these things don't change, so a lot of, you may have heard a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, but I'll also, make the statement that, over my career, I've learned that a lot of times repeating what you're talking about is what it takes to really move an industry towards, better best practices. And even within my own organization, I spend a lot of time, talking over and over about the importance of best practices in security development in order to, really get this, built into the individuals and the people who comprise the teams that develop security products at Qualcomm. I always like to start talking about, how did we get here? And this is an industry-wide. Security has always been a challenge in terms of commercialization. And, the economics of security are challenging. Downward cost pressure, product decisions that don't always favor security assurance. And there is a conflict between cost and security. And really, when we look at the commercial ecosystem and, if we're depending purely on economics to deliver good security assurance to, the users of our products, we're in trouble, right? So this has certainly become a focus lately of the governments around the world. And so when we rely on economics for good security, again, the outcomes are not great. So governments around the world are recognizing this, so we're seeing, all this momentum around regulatory action, CRA and EU, presidential directives in US, even in China, there's significant increase in regulatory action around security assurance. And what does that look like to us in the, delivering commercial products, technology into the market? It's certification, security certification. So, at Qualcomm, the growth of our certification program has been, I guess you could say, exponential. There's multiple dimensions of growth. There's the subsystems that we validate within our SOCs are growing. In 2019, we had a single subsystem that, we certified a few times. Now, we certify as many as 10 or 12 subsystems in an SOC, not only, with FIPS, but now there's CSIP, there's common criteria, and then a number of other certifications that we're subject to, in auto, ISO 21434, and so on. And, we have things coming like MD Cert. These things continue to come in and grow both in, the schemes, the subsystems, and then for Qualcomm, the SOCs too. So you're seeing, exponential growth for us over the last 4 years and a real big challenge around scale. And so part of scaling security in a development environment is having good best practices. And, part of those best practices and common criteria, they're referred to as flaw remediation. So, in the spirit of common criteria, this really means, the management of flaws and findings during the product life cycle. So it's really a communication that's happening between the developer, the product, the OEM, and the consumer of the product, right? And so there's been a lot of discussion around this on the software side over the last few years around disclosure policies and certainly regulation around that happening, and companies are subject to constraints around how to disclose security vulnerabilities in software. And so these requirements have come. They're being adopted into the product cycle of Qualcomm products and others, obviously. And the problem that we have with silicon is that silicon's immutable. So once the product has been transferred from the developer, from the manufacturer to the consumer, there's very little that can be done in terms of fixing or patching a vulnerability. So the idea around disclosure for hardware is quite different. And this is a topic that we're certainly taking on across several regions in terms of working with governments about how do we think about vulnerability disclosure with hardware. So again, very few options to correct silicon, and so the reason this is sort of a disclaimer here is that I'm not really here to talk about flaw remediation for common criteria, because really the way to think about flaw remediation in silicon is pre-silicon, when you can actually do something about the vulnerabilities and the flaws that you discover. So this is where the focus needs to be in terms of delivering a secure product into the market, and hopefully avoiding any surprises or findings in the market. So really today what I'm going to talk about is vulnerability management and best practices for hardware development, within the internal development flow. So from that perspective, it's not really ALC FLR that we're talking about, although it could be, right? And certainly there's been a focus in software on developing ALC FLR type methods and practices. But today we're going to talk about the internal development flow. And so at Qualcomm, over the last 7 or 8 years, we've developed, and I've initiated something I call security maturity, and it's a practice. There's a team who's involved in defining what is security maturity, how do we build secure products, and it's it's a holistic approach. So it has lots of different kind of ways of things that have to be done that are all related. Vulnerability and threat management certainly is one of them. Vulnerability tracking, threat assessment, building competency of the staff, ensuring traceability, and I'll talk about traceability in a minute, and the traceability in the internal development flow. There's secure operations and deployment, so things like our development environment. Certainly security evaluation and validation is something we've developed strong competency around, and a need for, obviously, if you're going to manage vulnerabilities, you have to find these things. You need the capabilities to discover these things, and that is an effort in and of itself. And certainly, having the processes, the policies, and enforcing their compliance is part of the holistic view of managing vulnerabilities, in an effort to try to avoid these surprises post-silicon. It also, when we do this analysis on vulnerabilities, we characterize vulnerabilities, what their root causes are. This tells us where we should be investing in our product development to have the biggest impact on security assurance. And the whole idea is to shift the security awareness, the validation, enforcement to the left of the life cycle, where things can be fixed with low cost, low impact to the schedule, low impact to the quality of the product. And So this is something we've been working on. And you know, the good news in terms of being a semiconductor developer is we do things like this really well already. We know how to take a very complex development environment and you know, process and make it predictable. So that requires, you know, things that are somewhat related to developing a process around vulnerability management, predictability. So certainly that's an important part of vulnerability management. Also product quality. So we know how to enforce product quality in a semiconductor product across a number of complex technologies, and security is just another one of those. So the main thing that happened for us to institute vulnerability management in the flow was to introduce a threat model and security functional requirements right up front, right at the product definition, and you know, this takes competency, this takes skill to write a meaningful threat model for a given product. And what's really important about that threat model is not only what we will protect, but what we won't protect. And there's always decisions around what is required for the, you know, there's a risk analysis, somewhat, you know, I think of it as an actuarial analysis where, you know, essentially we're looking at the risks and we're trying to understand how to prioritize the time and money spent to address each risk and, you know, if we should or not, if it's a real risk, if the probability of that risk emerging is, you know, appropriate for the amount being invested. So, you know, this was a big deal for us to start to bring this into our flow. Again, it was probably 7, 8 years ago where we really started to do this. And the last 3 or 4 years, we've really got a lot of momentum and we're really starting to do this well. And, you know, it is an iterative kind of process to adopt good vulnerability management. Part of that process of being good at managing vulnerabilities is knowing what the vulnerabilities are and how they happened. And so one of the things we did was we went back in time. We did a survey of 3 or 4 years of products. You know, fortunately for Qualcomm, we ship about 20 semiconductor products a year. So we have a wealth of information around things that went wrong in various forms, you know, JIRA tickets, things like this. And, you know, we went through and looked at everything and asked ourselves, you know, where do we need to focus in terms of managing vulnerabilities? And, you know, number one was process compliance. So, you know, in a commercial environment, time to market is king for most. And so what happens? You know, engineers cut corners, right, to meet schedule. And it happens. It happens more than I would say that I knew about. And when we started to discover this, you know, then there became a question of just enforce the processes that are already in place that ensure, you know, security assurance and make sure that these things are followed. So that was, you know, that was an easy one to put into play and to, you know, build some process around in terms of process compliance, right? Specification traceability turned out to be a big one. And I'll talk about it in a minute. In the complex development environment of a large SoC, hundreds of millions of transistors, things get lost. And you know, having a human actually trace through the documentation from product requirements to architecture specs, to microarchitecture specs, to test plans, to, you know, actually test benches, to, you know, coverage, and being able to say, you know, in the silicon, okay, there's this vulnerability, show me where it's covered throughout the, you know, the development flow of the process. It's really a big challenge. And for us, the secret was to automate the traceability of these and build a process around automating the tracking of vulnerabilities to enforce that these things were, first of all, you know, identified, dealt with, there was a record of what happened, and that we could use that record to make sure that these things didn't happen again. Which, by the way, when you're building, you know, 20 products a year, just the idea of knowing in a product there's a vulnerability, you fix it there, that doesn't guarantee that fix propagates into all the other like that doesn't happen automatically. That takes thought too, right? So, you know, more challenges around this. But, you know, back to the traceability issue, as we know, and if certainly in the semiconductor space, and I think also in the software space, a lot of what's happened over the last decade or 2 decades is how do we manage complexity? How do you abstract out complexity to a developer so that they can manage more complexity and describe things and develop things with broader scope and not have to hold everything in their head. So one of the things we noticed is like, this golden source of design data, that it doesn't really exist in our flow. Of course, product requirements are king. That's really the idea is that whatever comes out at the end, that Snapdragon product actually meets the product requirements that were spelled out by the product team. And so, this is the challenge, is this traceability across architecture, our RTL, and especially the test, and for security, the test plan, that we've covered the threat assessment, that all the threats are covered in our testing, and that we have high confidence that the threat model that was developed in the beginning is actually tested for and validated. But, what we found is, in the beginning that wasn't the case. There were lost intentions between product requirements. Document-based processes are not our friend. Right? They don't support automation, experimentation. They don't integrate with tools. We really need to incorporate machine analysis and validation. So to that point, we started looking at threat assessment with kind of a, it started with, there's this system-based engineering kind of methodology built around hypertext kind of languages like SysML. And so we started looking at kind of automating our threat model so that we could basically trace what was happening through. So this is where we have the golden source now of the threat. We'd like to develop this in some kind of XML-like language where we can generate architecture specs. We can generate the system test plan from this golden model and know that everything's consistent. The traceability is automated, and then can also be validated against the threat model and in an automated way. But the idea is that you're starting with a threat definition that's machine readable. Like, this is kind of the big jump, going from whether it be LaTeX, Word, whatever your document du jour tool is, that you're moving to kind of of what I would call model-based. MBSE is the old term, model-based system engineering kind of flow. And this automates basically the development of your test plan. The test plan can be generated from the threat model to guarantee there's full coverage against the threat model in your DV plan. Design validation for non-chip people. And it allows us to leverage tools that can automate the traceability and other things like document generation and save time and allow for more efficient engineering. The other aspect to vulnerability management is being really good at detecting these vulnerabilities. So, as such, we've developed internal evaluation capability. We have labs in several regions who are focused on penetration testing. They look a lot like these third-party labs that perform certification, and they're accredited by a government agency. And, we have a lab like that, and their job is to increase the confidence that when we do bring this product to a third-party lab, we have high confidence that will pass and that we understand basically the profile, the security profile of the chip before we're submitting this to a third party to evaluate. So this means building skills around, fault injection, side channel, probing, and so these are skills and competencies that we've developed at scale within Qualcomm. And then, of course, being able to do good risk assessment and pre-silicon support. But this was a big deal for us to grow this. Over the last, again, 8, 9, 10 years, this has been something that we've really been focused on getting good at. And I think for a semiconductor company, this is kind of essential to having strong security capabilities, that you have this internal competency around discovering vulnerabilities and flaws, and that you're finding these things early. And a lot of times we learn things on, last year's product or the product from 2 years ago that we're able to incorporate into the new products. And so it's not always, looking at the product is the product that we're concerned with. We're also evaluating older products to look at what could be in there. And, we do find stuff that, we didn't know about previously. And that's helpful. That allows us to get ahead of the curve on the newer products. Failure analysis is another important aspect of what we do, especially today with this focus on hardware Trojans and understanding kind of from a physical perspective, how to look at the implementation of a semiconductor device and what can happen and what can go wrong in terms of things like hardware Trojans. And failure analysis really has strong application in security, right? Because it allows for reverse engineering and a number of other things that can be leveraged into understanding what could, and again, we're talking about very advanced attacks here. We're talking about nation-state kind of threats that we're addressing with this. And it's a very kind of bespoke environment and skill. Obviously, Qualcomm's motivated. We have all the advanced equipment because obviously we're developing products in advanced nodes, 3 nanometer, 4 nanometer, 2 nanometer, and we need to be able to do failure analysis. So the security team gets to ride on the back of all that investment and capability to kind of bring our security objectives into that effort and be able to understand, have a good idea. And, a lot of times we even help the labs to learn about how this stuff works so that the labs can gain the skill, especially around advanced technology nodes. So the idea around having good flaw remediation and good vulnerability management is that we're getting better. And so keeping statistics, keeping the data around this is important, and tracking, first of all, classifying vulnerabilities, talking about what were the countermeasures that were developed as a result of vulnerabilities, and keeping track of this stuff, and showing an impact analysis over time is something that's really helpful. We like to know that the money we spend is actually reducing findings that are happening in our internal flow. And this is kind of our the thermometer that tells us the temperature of how we're doing, and how effective is the investment, and addressing the business pressure around demonstrating ROI. These are the kind of objectives that we keep so the money keeps coming in and people understand why we're doing this, and that some of these vulnerabilities could have created really impactful, from an economic standpoint, impactful outcomes to Qualcomm that are not good. We talk in terms of stock price impacting events, and those outcomes are real. And we're working really hard to make sure we don't have outcomes like that. And I think we've done pretty well over the last decade. There's been a couple hairy moments, and but that this comes with the territory. Really, again, the important part of this for us was to put a system in place where we came up with what I would call we call them security maturity tags. And a tag is kind of a record of a vulnerability that's been found. It talks about root cause. It basically, it helps us to prioritize where our initiatives need to be, what we need to be looking at. identifying areas of new investment, and, in general, improving the overall security assurance at Qualcomm. Now, this whole thing really came out of the need for Qualcomm to get good at security certification. Like, that was really the impetus for the investment and to get started. And, more specifically, common criteria, a kind of a smart card, high assurance evaluation that caused us to look at all the things that we needed to do to be good at high assurance certification. But really what we found is best practices like vulnerability tracking are really just good, hygiene for the product, security hygiene. And so even though, maybe the kind of the diligence of a certification-driven tracking is expensive and takes a lot of effort, there's also less stringent things that have come out of it that are just best practice across the whole SoC. So, we're even, working with different subsystems in the SoC to help them to improve the security assurance of, for instance, the neural processing unit, the GPU, the CPU, the network on chip teams, right, to help with their security knowledge. And this is a challenge in terms of scale. But the best practices really help us to give us a foundation by which to communicate to the rest of the development team how to think about security and give them the data they need and justify why they should pay attention. So it's had a big impact. Our instituting our vulnerability tracking system. It's involved training. So certainly, people need to be skilled in security to understand how to identify vulnerabilities. And this is one of the most important things, I think that's come out of this also is developing engineers to be good at security. This is something we take seriously, and it's really, we pay attention to that. And growing the competency and the horsepower of the security competency of the team that's needed to scale. And again, going back to the opening slide, I think the scale of security competency is a big issue around a lot of the outcomes of the regulatory action and this increased certification need that, the exponential curve that I showed. So, again, just to close here, I really didn't, we weren't really talking about ALC, FLR, which you might have expected coming in, but we are talking about certification, we are talking about best practices that I think will be formalized in the future when we start to talk about vulnerability disclosure. Have had a few conversations at the conference this week around what that could look like and how that, could establish trust in companies that they were actually, addressing the vulnerability management without, doing something that involves disclosure of something that can't be fixed. So moving that, to the pre-silicon and demonstrating that you've got best practices in place like this to avoid that surprise in the field in immutable silicon that doesn't really have, any fix available to it. So that was kind of the objective today, to share that connection. So that's what I have. Any questions? Tony.
Yeah. So what are the bottlenecks? Like, can the third-party labs keep up with this volume of certification?
Yeah, okay, so I'm speaking from the developer perspective, right? And so I really don't want to speak on behalf of the labs, but I think it's been recognized that this, magnitude of security competency that's required is a challenge for everybody globally, right? And not only the labs, but the certifiers, right? So what you're seeing is, and what we're adopting and what I'm talking about is automation, right? How do we become more efficient with the competency we have, and how do we, have bigger impact with that competency across, a greater number of issues, a greater number of products, And, the answer right now that we're thinking of is automation. And, that's the impetus behind machine readable, behind, being able to develop a model where it can be, a lot of this stuff becomes, generating, instead of having a security, expert have to write everything out and sit down and spend his time developing documentation. We can generate documentation from a model and be very agile in terms of how we target that documentation and automate. Okay, I've avoided the term, but, the adoption of artificial intelligence, of AI in some of these methods that may be able to help with the automation and the increased efficiency of the security competency we have. So it's a big topic, Tony. I'm hearing a lot about it with our partners, our lab partners, with the certifiers, with government agencies. It's a big deal. So.
You mentioned finding vulnerabilities in legacy products. Once the chips are in the hands of your customers and you have firmware that Qualcomm owns, it's closed source, how much is Qualcomm thinking about maintaining and that long term for products that last 10, 15 years in the field?
Oh, in terms of time? Well, certainly. Okay, so I'm not on the software side, but I can tell you we certainly will abide by the regulatory laws around how much time and but yeah, I don't have a lot to say about the software aspect. I can tell you, we do invest. We have, bounty programs. We have, there's certainly a mechanism to report, vulnerabilities that will be addressed. And yeah, but sorry, I can't really address the software aspect. Yeah.
All right, so let's thank our speaker. But the panel is led by Trish Wolff, leader of FIPS certifications at Cisco Systems. They're going to be talking about certifications and common modules, a story of collaboration, capability, and change.
I came the wrong direction.
Yeah, he just came walking up. Is it better if I trade?
Have any of you ever been to a story time or an author talk? In a story time or an author talk, nobody sits back that far. So I would highly recommend you move forward because this needs to be an intimate conversation. So please stand up and move forward. I'm speaking to you all in the back row. And no one's listening to me. You guys good?
We're good. I think, Clint, are you
Clint, you good? Everybody's good? Okay, well, hey, I want to welcome you all here today. And I do want this to be a story, a conversation. If ever you've attended an author talk or you've attended a story time, think about maybe your children or your grandchildren, you've actually gone to a story time. And think about those kids. They don't sit still. They actually join in and they participate in the conversation. And that's what we want to do today. We want to have a conversation. I'm not your only author up here today. I am fortunate to have a whole panel of authors up here with me. And when I presented this idea to the program committee, I called it a story of collaboration, capability, and change. But I wish I would have called it a story of challenge, collaboration, capability, and change. Because out of challenge we came together as a team. We came up with an approach, and we have changed the way we do certifications, and we do work together as a team at Cisco. So we wanted to present to you today that and how we've accomplished that. My name's Trish Wolff. I am a security research engineer at Cisco. I primarily focus in FIPS, but I have also done common criteria and have dabbled in DOD and APL. Like I said, I've got a whole team with me, and I want them to introduce themselves. The other thing is, story time should be kind of personal. You want to know something more about your authors, not just who they are as validators. So I'm going to ask them to tell you their names, who they are, why they're here with me today, and I also want them to share what's their favorite book. What's something that actually motivates, drives them, interests them? We're going to start with my boss, Patty Karpus.
Hi, my name's Patty Karpus, and as Trish said, I work with the FIPS group at Cisco. I am currently the FIPS manager, we have a FIPS team that focuses on FIPS certifications, but we also have a team that covers all the different federal certifications, including the DOD and APL, as you mentioned, common criteria, and USGV6 ready logo. So the FIPS group is part of a larger organization that we call GCT, or the Global Certification Team. And that team is actually a part of a larger organization at Cisco called STO, or the Security and Trust Organization. So we make up, we are basically a services operations organization that supports all the Cisco product lines, from our routers and switches to our wireless products to our security products, collaboration products. So, we interact with all the teams at Cisco. Let's see, I have to think about what my favorite book might have been. So I think as a child, or reading to my kids, Goodnight Moon was always a common one that, just sort of, it was a great way to end your day. No matter what was happening, it was good to just all settle in and say goodnight.
Love that. It's okay. Norman?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Norman Ashley. I am one of the members of an engineering team that implements the common security modules. And so we address requirements for FIPS, common criteria, and so these libraries, they're common, they're used across different products. So our team, we don't own a product, but these libraries are adopted and integrated into other products. My book, I have it here, I'll show it to you. It's called the Hello Goodbye Window. And it's a story about a small family always visiting their grandparents. And when they come up, there's the window that they see, which is in the kitchen. And so they could see grandma or grandpa in the window as they come, so it's the hello. And when they leave, that's the same window that they're standing in, and goodbye. So.
Love that one. Okay, Clint?
Hi, my name's Clint Winebrenner, and I am the technical leader running our ACVP program at Cisco. We are a first-party ACV lab. We were the first-party ACV lab in industry, and what we do, aside from doing all the NV lab stuff that lets us be a laboratory, on the other side, it's facilitating the testing, the procedures, the quality system, the technical stuff to the different business units. You have different requirements for testing. Thankfully, Norm and his gang make our job a lot easier when we are able to use those distributed common modules. So, but that's what we do. We saw early on that we were doing a lot of algorithm tests. So when the idea of a first-party lab came around, our management hierarchy was all about that and put us on it, and it's been a good move for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you have a favorite book?
Oh gosh, that's the part I wasn't ready for. When I was a kid, my favorite book was Where the Red Fern Grows. Oh. And it's about a young boy who grows up in Appalachia hunting with his dogs, and just that was one of my favorite things to read as a kid.
I love that book. Okay, and Len.
Hi, I'm Len Prince. Like Trish, they call me a security research engineer. Primarily, I work with our third-party labs to put together our FIPS security policies and the supporting documentation. And then I also work with our business units to sort of assist them through the transition to make sure that they understand the FIPS requirements and they integrate everything into their products correctly using the common modules that Norm and his team put together. And my favorite book has been and always will be any of the Lord of the Rings books.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question.
Absolutely.
ACB lab, can you explain the first party lab?
We are going to get to that.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to lay out for you the agenda, or the chapters in this book. What we're going to do is we're going to give you a little history lesson on why we are structured like this and the things we do. And then we're going to talk about the challenges and successes that we have had in getting to and doing that structure. And answering what is an ACVP lab is definitely a key point that we are going to get to. And then the very last thing we're going to talk about is where we go in the future. This whole week we've talked a lot about cloud, a lot about PQC. That room over there is very, very crowded talking about AMVP. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about kind of how we're going to face those challenges going forward. So if at any point we do not get to answering your question and you don't feel like you have a good answer, stand up and ask it again, because we definitely are planning to get there. So let's dive in. So in any good book, you always start out with, think about it, they always start out with kind of laying out who the characters are. So you've met the characters, but let's understand kind of how they got here. And we're actually going to build the story around, first we're going to talk about the certifications we do, and Patty's going to talk about the groups and why we're together and how we collaborate. And then we're going to move on to common modules. Lots of companies do them. It's very much a thing that, AWS is doing it, Google has their own thing. There's lots. I'm not even going to go through listing them all, but everybody does kind of the common module thing. We're going to talk about how Cisco does that differently, and Norm's going to talk about why we did it, how we did it, the breadth of scope that we do it in. Then we'll move to Clint talking about ACVP, and he kind of alluded to why we did it, but let's talk about a little bit deeper on the history and what that means. And then we'll end up wrapping it all up, looking out, because this is all the certifications in the Security and Trust Organization. Len's a part of that group, but Len really faces outward. He looks at the product teams and really brings it all together. So that's kind of the story we're going to follow right now, and then we'll move on to other things as we continue the discussion. But let's start off with just the, how did we get here? So Patty, can you tell us a little bit about the global certifications team, who we are, why we're together, and how we collaborate as a team?
Okay. So as I mentioned, and when I first started talking, that we have the global certifications team, and we cover largely the government, the federal government's certifications, focused on the U.S. FIPS is we're all here for, along with the common criteria, USGV6, and the DOD and APL. And we have a kind of a matrix organization made up of certification engineers, a program management team, and then of course we interact with Norm and the common security modules. We have an ACVP lab, as well as a support organization that helps our product teams, get to where they are certifiable. We have a group that helps with the kind of the software development piece, as well as like Len and the other engineers, or SREs, as we call the security research engineers, that really work to get the product teams to adopt the common modules so that we can take them through certifications. The number of certifications, I think last year we did close to 200 total product certifications, made up a combination of common libraries as well as specific product certifications across those 4 groupings. So in order to sustain that number, Cisco decided to put in place an organization that really focuses on those. So every product team has, like we align by product line. So like Len is focused on our wireless products. Typically each of the engineers covers a particular area. And when you go for certifications, most people want not just one, but the whole suite. So we kind of give you a cert team. You get a program manager and someone who represents each of the certification teams that walks you through what you need to do to get that certification, works with requirements, gapping, and then how you close those gaps in order to take the product through certification. So, and more of one of the benefits we get from that is where there's overlap, we can gain that from having the common team. So we've got, the first party ACVP lab, so we can get that covered, and then we'll cover FIPS and CC requirements. So we're able to kind of have a one-stop shop for all your certification needs with the global certification team.
Okay, and a lot of what Patty talked about in there was common modules, and we leverage those quite a bit across our certification teams. So Norm, can you tell us a little bit about why did Cisco start doing common modules? How do we do them? And what types of common modules do we support?
Sure. Yep, so like Patty laid out the broad product lines that Cisco implements and sells. And so in the early days, each product was going through this process. And so you had engineering teams, trying to meet requirements of the product and then the certification. And so it was a chaotic thing. All the requirements sometimes was not met or addressed. And so the Common Security Modules team stood up to kind of have a focused engineering take on meeting these requirements. And so we have areas of like crypto libraries, secure boot, I think entropy, and with ACVP coming on, so our team is involved in in all aspects of those development. And so ACVP is what the tool that Clint uses to automate a lot of these tests.
Well, that is a perfect handoff. So Clint, can you tell us a little bit about ACVP? Why did we do it? What is a first-party lab, and how did we get there?
Sure. So, the whole reason we decided to become a first-party lab, and what that means is I don't need a FIPS lab to do any of my algorithm testing, right? We've gone historically, and in a previous role, I was the FIPS lead at Cisco, so I oversaw or was hands-on with every single algorithm test that was happening with every business unit. And it would be a time-consuming thing, a resource-consuming thing, where we'd send the algorithm sheet, information sheet over and have to do all those options for every algorithm, every mode, all that stuff, send it back and pray to dear God there's no incorrect statements on it, because if you have incorrect statements on it, the vectors you then receive and return to verify are incorrect as well. You're going to fail. And it's just, so we saw this opportunity to be a first-party lab, which means we can, through a NavLab accreditation process, receive the trust and the capabilities to do our own ACVP testing, and that allowed us then to, like we said, automate a lot of this stuff, because now I don't have to worry about that information being exchanged on the different cryptographic modules and that lack or loss of information that happens in those chains. It's just human error. Nobody's trying to slow us down on purpose, right? It's just human error. It's the nature of the business. But we've been able to eliminate some of that human error by course of automation, right? And so one of the reasons we wanted to do that is because we do a lot more software releases on Cisco.com that get put through this certification process, right? And there's always, well, how do we know that cryptographic module didn't change from this release to this release? Well, without that evaluation process, without that code review, without looking at that build process, without looking at all those things, you don't know that. But one of the things we can do, now that we're a first-party lab, is run ACVP algorithm testing on that software release that will never go into a certification process. But then I have some confidence there that the cryptographic module was there, it's the right version, all the algorithms are operating as expected. So we did it to sort of boost up not only our ability to put certifications through quickly or more quickly, more efficient, but also the old, information security thing, trust but verify, right? I trust that that's the right module, but by doing my ACV testing as a first-party lab, it doesn't cost me money. All it costs me is time. I'm able to go out there, run that test on it, get my AOK back from ACVP, and then know that these releases, while they're not being formally verified, I know I've said that 3 times, I want you to know that that's the key point here. They're not formally verified, but by virtue of this test, I'm able to have some sort of sense of peace that it's what it's supposed to be and operating correctly.
Yeah. So it's really great. ACVP has actually been a game changer because it also lets us push the ACVP testing very early in the development cycle. So besides getting compliance and assurance on the back end, we get assurance really early in the development cycle. So Cisco just posted a library, and in that library development, we actually did the ACVP testing as the first step. And so we said, hey, are we good? And then when the library was fully when we hit code, what I call code freeze, when we hit code freeze and we were ready to FCS or release that thing, we actually were able to then validate that ACVP testing again. And so we are able to, throughout our development process, be able to do that. And that is one of the huge advantages. So it's great for assurance on the back end, but it's also great for development on the front end. But what I really want to now move to is, Len, can you kind of take, so we've talked about these things that we've put in place. We have a collaborative team, we have common modules, we have the ACVP lab. How do you leverage those things when you go out to the product teams, and how do you work with the product teams and certifications?
So having everything in-house, done under one roof, and our business units and our software developers using our common modules instead of using or relying on explicit third-party open source modules, such as like OpenSSL or Bouncy Castle. One of the things about the FIPS requirements is FIPS doesn't actually specify the way it's supposed to be done. FIPS gives you the checklist of the things that you have to do to be compliant. In short, they don't care how you get there, so long as you get there. So if our business units were using these open source libraries, I may not know exactly how it works, or if there's something that's going on that we don't understand, we have to reach out to whoever owns the library for their assistance. But with Norm and his team, because they do everything in-house, and all of our business units and all of our software developers use our products in-house, I know how everything works from top to bottom. So if there's an issue with something, if I can't answer it, I can go straight to Norm, and he can take it from there. We don't lose any time. We don't have to worry about getting third-party vendor support, which may or may not cost money or anything like that. So having everything under one roof makes everyone's job easier. There's no question of how does this work, or why does this work this way? I thought it was supposed to be this way, so on and so forth. So we take the requirements, work with Norm's team. They build our own SSL modules, and our business units use those across multiple platforms. I think almost all of our platforms, with the exception of a select few, most of them use our in-house cryptographic library.
Okay, so we've kind of laid the groundwork. You kind of see where we're at today. Are there any questions at this point in the story? Yep, go ahead. Yeah, please move to the mic. Thank you.
Hi, I had a couple questions. One was, so on the ACVP lab, so do you get an approval from NIST? Do you get a CAVP algorithm certs?
We do, but I'll let so Clint, can you talk through, do we get, actually Len, you can answer this because you do it. Do we get CAVP algorithm certs, and how do we do it?
Yes.
Well, I know you get them, but you get them based on the work you do internally as a first-party lab?
Correct,
You just
yes.
tell them, hey, we did this, and
Yeah,
they give
so,
you a cert?
so we have a test harness that's built into both of our cryptographic modules that we use to reach out to our proxy servers that talks to the NIST ACVP server to download vectors. And then our test harness generates response vectors, and then we present those responses back to the server for them to validate. And if everything's validated, we are issued a CAVP certificate for the particular product, yes.
You have to like firewall that whole lab off from, and the people who work on it off from the rest of your development?
Yeah.
Why don't we have Clint talk about that a little bit? Clint, do we firewall that off? So how do we ensure that's secure?
ACVP server on our side, how is it secure?
How's it stored?
Secure.
Well, that seems like a personal question.
Actually, yes it is. So maybe the answer is just yes, it is.
We are always privy to all the Handbook 150 requirements. So like, if you've been in a FIPS lab before, there's certain things like anything data in transit shall be secured using FIPS 140- well, it says 2, but it should say 3 now. Based encryption. We have a lot of things in place internally at Cisco. We have
I guess my question was more like, do you have to isolate your team who's doing that from like Norm's team who's developing the model?
Oh, I understand. Yes.
That's the question. I did not
Yeah,
quite
sorry.
get that.
Yes, so
Yeah.
if you don't mind, can I answer? So the process of becoming an accredited party lab means that you have to specify who can and who cannot be considered
Yeah.
a tester. So like this guy, he's not testing on our stuff. If he does, we get in trouble when we're audited. So there are people on our team, actually all of us, so myself, Clint, Trish, Lisa from Cisco, we're all considered testers in the eyes of the CMVP, so that we are allowed to do our own algorithm testing. If we weren't, for whatever reason, and that's all done during the initialization process, and then every year we're audited, then we have to prove who's tested. So there's only a handful of people. Our business units and our software developers actually aren't testers, so they're not allowed to do the ACVP algorithm testing.
Okay.
And we have
It's
to
not
go-
a public-facing server at all. It's within the enclave of the VPN, and I have the ability to, if you are a Cisco person and you logged into my server, that doesn't mean you can test. That doesn't mean you can do anything. We still have user-level access controls that I can, and that gives me the ability to meet a lot of the NVLAP requirements as a lab, because as a lab, part of all your quality control stuff is, are you managing this? Are you recording this? And are you doing it the way you're supposed to? So we're able to implement a lot of those security controls throughout our portal. And I know not everybody's going to have a portal like us, because I've been very fortunate. We have a team of common module developers. We have a whole team of portal developers. And we have a team of ACVP application developers. So it's not like a historical small certification lab where if you're a lead or you're one of the senior people in your FIPS lab, you're wearing about 37 hats trying to get through the evaluation process because you do that. We've been able to sort of separate that out and put the specialist where they can, have the most impact.
And that's actually going to really nicely lead to talking about challenges and successes, because we haven't always been there. Like, I've been with Cisco for 4 years, and I can tell you where we started 4 years ago to where we are today is amazing. The work that Clint and Norm and team are doing is outstanding, and it's always improving, which is really important because your process just should never stop or stay stagnant. I do also want to add to what Len said. We don't just get to be testers. We have to review the quality manual. We have to do training. We have to continue to do testing. If I go through a long period where I don't do it, then they'll be like, hey, you got to go run some vectors and give this a try. So I don't get to just, say, yeah, it's a one and done. I need to continue to grow and learn. So do you have any other questions?
My other question was for Norm. You mentioned secure boot. Do you guys does your group do secure boot like for all the products at Cisco, or is it just within the crypto modules?
It's used across many products. Yeah.
So if you have new products and things that are different form factors, your group will handle like the secure boot design in a way that works for like all the products across Cisco?
Yeah, in essence, we do the common, like this is what everybody does or needs. Mm-hmm. So if there's a one-off, they're on their own, sort of. but for the most part, yeah. And it usually has to do with just, again, all the common things that, bring up does or startup does.
We have what's called the Cisco Secure Development Lifecycle, or we call it affectionately CSDL. And as part of that, there is what we have is the product security baseline. So all products, have to incorporate, whether they're certification requirements or not, there are at least a baseline of security that ensures secure boot. There's like a checklist of, 7 common elements that, allow us to claim a level of product security, just without even considering the certification aspect. So that there's the team within Stowe that develops, works on trust anchor modules, the secure boot and that type of thing, so that, we can guarantee that there's some level of security in every product that we ship, whether or not they're going for certifications. So.
And I think you stole my notes, because the other challenge we're going to talk about is onboarding new products and new companies. So, Cisco's large, and we do lots of acquisitions, and we bring in lots of new products. And how we ensure security in those new acquisitions was one of the challenges we're going to talk about. So I think you actually looked at my notes ahead of time, which is good. It's part of the conversation. So let's move on to that. Let's talk about challenges and successes. So you kind of really got a good history lesson. You know where we're at with some really good questions. And please keep the questions coming. That was excellent. I'm so glad you stood up and did that. Please ask questions, because now we're going to talk about how we got here. And kind of not everything's been smooth and beautiful. You know, we have a lot of challenges, a lot of things we work through. I actually want to start with what Len and Clint were talking about. And Len, I'm going to kick it to you. Between you and Clint, can you guys talk about ACVP and sort of like challenges we faced and some of the things you'd say you're the most proud of?
Challenges?
For ACVP.
So, when you ask me that, my first thing is we don't have any challenges. We're wonderful. But obviously that's not the entire truth and nothing but the truth. Some of the challenges we have is obviously we have Cisco being as diverse as it is. You know, we're spread out all over the globe, and not just like physically spread out all over the globe. I feel like our technology is kind of spread out all over the globe, if you see the metaphor and what I'm trying to say. So it's not just like OpenSSL-based crypto modules. It's not just Java bouncy castle. It's ASICs, it's FPGAs, it's hardware, silicon, and those are the things that I see being a challenge, is trying to encapsulate all of that so that my team can be repeatable in how they deliver and how quickly they deliver. Because a lot of times somebody comes up to us and says, oh, we just figured out we need a certification on this. Okay, that's no problem. When do you need that?
Yesterday.
Yesterday is usually the preferred answer, right? And so one of the things ACP gives us the ability to do is execute quickly. So I think that's one of the things we bring to the table that we couldn't have, because in the old days, if that happened, we'd have to call up the FIPS lab and say, oh my goodness, we forgot to test RSA on this processor. I need vectors yesterday. Oh, well. So we've eliminated that. So now we're the point of failure instead of other people being the point of failure. But we're able to take the challenges we've had historically, and I feel like sort of condense them. We still have challenges, but the ones that stick out in my mind as being the most painful, we've reduced considerably, just by virtue of being able to do things in-house, being able to move quickly and move precisely.
Len, what about tools and how we do the ACVP process? You were there from the beginning and where we are today. Can you kind of at a high level talk about how that's changed and how you're, like, the success you're seeing in what's available to you?
Just to me?
No. I mean, if you want it, but no. Yeah, I mean, in the early days, so Clint mentioned earlier we have a portal. Our portal has changed drastically. So prior to where it is now, so our portal now is designed so that it tracks all of the algorithms that we test automatically. And so there's nothing extra that I have to do at this point to verify that I actually tested the algorithms that I said I tested. It's there, it's tracked. And that's in line with the changes at the CAVP for how they want ACVP to be done. Early on, that was not the case. So we went from sending emails about all the vectors that we needed to test to we moved to a smart sheet, and that was chaos. And then we tried to do a WebEx Teams room. Shit, that was awful. Our other ACVP developer, he's not here, Ricky, he tried to set up like a specific email calendar, sort of like a, hey, on the 30th, I'm going to do ACVP testing, and can you have this to me by then? And that just wasn't feasible for whatever reason. And so I think it was Mike Lucan, who works on the portal.
Mike Boulay.
Mike
Boulay.
Okay, Mike Boulay, yeah. So they worked with the CAVP and put together a portal that literally does all of that for us now. So it keeps track of our test session files, which have all of our vector requests and everything that the CAVP uses to validate our vector responses. That's all tracked manually now. So I literally just go to the portal, tell them what I need done. They create the test for me. I go test. And when I'm done testing, my job is over. And everything else happens on the back end. So yeah, we've changed a lot from it. The reason I mentioned some things were just terrible is because it was new, and it was a trial and error of what works, what doesn't work. And collectively, some things some people liked on the team, the majority didn't. And most of the times, the majority wins. So lots of trial and error, lots of trying different things, and then ultimately the portal ended up being what stuck the most and allows me to do my job as quickly and efficiently as I can.
And what's cool about this, so like I said, I'm a tester too, and this is really part of the story. It's about collaboration. So one of the great things about Norman, Clint, and their teams is we came back with suggestions and said, hey, we need this. And they are actually always looking for, hey, what can we do to make it better? We're not done. The portal's continually evolving. But this is a prime example where Cisco is collaborating amongst our teams. And I've made suggestions, Len's made suggestions, but there's lots of other folks behind us who are making suggestions. And this is where you really see us come together and where it is driving the certification process. So when I do my testing, I used to have to then go back to and then I have to look at the ACVP portal or the CAVP portal to our portal, and I'd have to match everything up and make sure it was good. And now it's all right there. I can very quickly be like, oh, yep, okay, everything I did, transferred over here, I'm done. And it's complete. And it's gotten so efficient. But it wasn't that way at first. And that's why, like, Len telling you the dirty, rotten details isn't bad, because none of these things are easy. It takes time. But through collaboration, we've made the process very streamlined, and it's continuing to get better. I want to move on to talking about some successes with common modules. We've had successes. We've also had some challenges. So Patty and Norm, can you guys talk about, you both mentioned we do lots of modules and we do lots of certifications. But what happens when there's vulnerabilities or when you're stuck in the CMVP queue?
Well, we've tried. Do you want to take that or? Okay. No, I was going to say we've been able to leverage updates and changes and kind of work through different processes to kind of change the way we do things, or at least the way we point to modules. I mean, one of the things we do is take a common module and, use that across products so that if we get certified, we can cover all those products. Now, when we're stuck in the queue, we get the opposite problem. All these products are waiting for certification. So we've had to, adjust to, maybe having, letters of intent or some type of, point to the fact that it's been certified by a validated lab and an accredited lab, and that should be good enough for the time being. So we've taken some creative measures to, indicate the security of our modules even when we can't get them out of the queue. But one of the other things of having the common modules is that we are able to adapt to the transitions and the algorithm changes and the new requirements, and don't have to, go to every team and say, you need to change this, you need to change this. We're able to make one module, and then just everyone, you're going to have to eventually go to this new module, and you'll be compliant with the latest requirements. And, in transitions, and I think everyone's faced some of the transitions at transition times, because we know the development cycle. They want you to transition in 6 months when we have a 12 to 18 month development life cycle. So trying to balance that has definitely been a challenge. So we've tried to rely on our internal adjustment between teams, or coming out with ways to circumvent or get at least some type of point to the MIP or something to say, we're in process, we're good to go, we're just not at the other end yet. So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges. While we can easily certify across the board, we can also be stuck across the board, depending on that queue.
Yeah, and we don't get 12 or 18 months. Yeah, we have to be ahead of one of the things Patty mentioned is like changes in IGs or standards, and we have to be forward-looking. So sometimes we have things are in development, and we got a few of them in the queue, kind of lined up, and so sometimes that helps, but it does mean that you at times have a version kind of behind as you're waiting to get that through, and we're working on the next requirement or the next change. But I think, I do remember there's a time where we had a CVE and we needed to get that changed. And at the same time, we were on the expiration of one of the versions. And just having to work with our team, with the lab, to try to get, one of the way we engineered the change, it was kind of like a none. It didn't affect any executables. It was just like a header file change. And we had to go through this series of meetings with the lab to kind of get their buy-in, their understanding, and an agreement to kind of take this through as a change.
I think some of the challenges were it wasn't a defined process within the CMVP of how to address a CVE. So what was the right way? And I know right before this, there was a talk about addressing vulnerabilities for common criteria, but again, I think we're all impacted. And I think that's where the collaboration across the different types of certifications, we're all coming across different, challenges that do align, like it impacts us, it impacts this certification. So kind of trying to work toward a common way of resolving these issues so that it's a one and done. And that's with the algorithm testing as well, with the AC. I know I'm kind of jumping topics, but we've got the way it needs to be, pointed to for CC, and then we've got the way FIPS will accept it, and trying to adjust to that. And that's where having our own portal in our own situation makes us much more adaptable to kind of, will this work for you, will this work for you? And that way we can kind of streamline that, everyone's covered by this process. But understanding everyone else's needs, I think definitely helps, kind of, I don't know if you want to call it the least common denominator or whatever across cert teams, but we can definitely focus on, meeting the needs of all certifications so that by focusing on one, we aren't, hurting one of the others, so.
Yeah, and another thing you might come across, so there's requirements for certification, you pick it FIPS or CC, but product lines have their own requirements, and they don't often gel with FIPS or CC. I mean, you think about some of the old, like DES or SHA or
interoperability.
And backwards compatibility with, previous versions and requirements for their products. And, it often requires a conversation with the product teams about, hey, well, this mandate's coming, this is going away. And they're like, no, it's used across here and there, and, we're going to lose $1 billion gazillion if you take that out,
I think that's, The interoperability piece, I think, is something that's really been challenging for us is, when operating, we focus on the crypto module in a particular product, whereas Common Criteria has more of a toe and DoD has more of a solution, and trying to meet something that, we can get FIPS on, but then when you actually deploy it in a system that you're not, causing other things to stop working based on a FIPS approved mode or certain algorithms that are no longer available, but are used, in other situations. So I think trying to navigate that has been a challenge, from morphing between certifications and then solutions and interoperability and backward compatibility.
And it has definitely been a challenge. It's been a success to watch as we have product team certification groups that we all, so like Patty said, we actually work in verticals across the product teams, and that whole team meets together. So when one of our common modules was stuck, the DoD team and myself and the Common Criteria team, we all had to work together to say, okay, how are we going to keep you all moving while dealing with this stuck situation? And that was a big success for us. We actually figured out an approach. We had to, really work together to communicate that approach and implement that approach. But that's where, that challenge gave us a really great opportunity to work together and establish that we were a team looking at a breadth of requirements. And when you approach a certification, you shouldn't just, if you are looking at things more than just FIPS, like a lot of organizations just look at the crypto module. But there are cases where you want to look at the entire system, the interoperability of the system, and so you're looking at wider requirements and bringing in those various perspectives. Cloud is another great place where we're going to start to build that relationship, and we'll get there eventually. But I see we have a question. Go ahead.
So it's actually just a question, but it's also just to also add to the story, if you will. So just quickly looking this up, just to add some additional context, you have over 32 active 140-3 certificates. You have 8 to 10 of them that are currently in process. And then you also are working with a plethora of different labs.
Yep.
All right, at any one time. And as you mentioned, you get stuck, and I imagine you also know how to communicate with each one of the different labs, because none of them communicate the same way.
Yes.
So it sounds like you have a lot more infrastructure. Actually, you probably have a lot more resources than actually the CMVP actually has, because they only have 9 people. I mean, you have more than 9 people.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess my question is also to Norm as well. Do you see the development teams when that you say, hey, I have this common module, it's already gone through, it has all of this stuff, it's really great, and they say, well, it's too big, or I don't want to use that, I want to use this. Do you see a lot of pushback from?
We get some. We do get some. I think one of the things that makes our team's offer attractive is that they get support, they get CVE fixes, and they get the certification. And they get the money too, so.
That's the thing, we're a support and services organization, so we get nothing but ginormous headaches out of this whole process. But no, I mean, it is really to enable those federal sales, and, you know, we kind of sell ourselves that, you know, in the security and trust organization, we actually impact the bottom line by enabling, you know, the federal business. So, and in some of our cases, for some of the products at Cisco, the federal government is our biggest customer. So the product teams are encouraged to get, you know, the certifications in order to increase their profits. So it's a win, and, you know, we're kind of a triangular where our federal sales team, our product teams, and GCT have like a, you know, a relationship of how it drives the necessary requirements, and then, you know, what works. We have to prioritize, because again, even though we are larger, you know, we're not a 9-person organization, we're also not limitless. So we have to definitely look at, you know, which products are on our top 50, top 100, and focus on those certifications. So it is a lot of prioritization. Then, as you mentioned, the number of labs that we support, we have a lab manager, a lab vendor manager person on our team that actually coordinates, you know, allocating with the lab in order that we don't overload one, or if we run into an issue with one, we have a backup plan type of thing. So, like we said, it's a ginormous collaboration, you know, that covers the different aspects to make it all work like a well-oiled machine. And, you know, behind the scenes, we're not as well-oiled as we may seem to be.
The other thing is, like, you point out all those stats, and yes, we do a lot of certifications. We work with a lot of labs. There's a lot of us reaching out and talking to people. But I'm hoping you're getting some best practices or some ideas that you can take with you, even if you're a smaller organization, because there's a lot that we do that you can leverage. The collaboration, like one of the things that I have so appreciated about being at Cisco is their holistic view. They don't just look at the FIPS module. And that is something that any organization can do. So really taking some nuggets from this conversation and figuring out how to apply them to your organization. The other thing is we're going to be around the rest of the day. Come ask us questions. I see we have one right now.
So regarding the crypto library.
Can you move closer to the mic,
okay,
please?
Sorry. Yeah. So regarding the crypto library, so do you lock it down, meaning when that library is used, does it allow only FIPS-approved algorithms, or is it up to the user of that library to decide what is allowed and what is not allowed? And also, how do you handle crypto offload? Some devices might have some hardware offload functionality. Do you also cover that? And as a follow-up, right, I mean, the crypto functionality is one thing, but for FIPS and common criteria, we have other things like zeroization, secure storage, system integrity, error state. Do you also provide some common functionality for those things?
Okay, let's repeat those questions. Let's make sure we got it. And then Norm, this is coming to you. Okay, so question number 1 was, do we lock down the library and only allow FIPS-approved algorithms, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, second question was, how do we handle offloading things like acceleration? So you're talking about like offloading the mod P for a DH algorithm, right?
That's right.
Okay, and then the third thing was dealing with like secure storage.
Zeroization,
Zeroization?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so things that would be handled by the host application, so outside of the library. So the zeroization, the storage, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's start with question number 1. So do we lock it down, and how does that work?
Technical answer, it depends.
Yeah.
So yes, there's some exceptions for backwards compatibility. For example, like where you might be allowed to decrypt but not encrypt because, but then just to allow like reading a certificate or processing a certificate that was pre a change, right? So you might get to decrypt, for example. But for the most part, yes, only once you're in FIPS mode, the library only allows FIPS approved algorithm. And so once the system is in that mode, does that cover that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, acceleration, do you want to hit that at all?
So the module, the boundary is what, is certified. And so that might be on a product by product basis. So, but our team's just focused on this limited boundary.
The acceleration falls a lot to the hardware, and we're doing a lot of work around that. So you're about to spin us to challenges, which we're not going to have as much time for as I'd hope. But that is actually a challenge we're facing right now, is a lot of crypto, because of acceleration, is moving down to hardware. And how do we approach that going forward? How do we work with the hardware vendors to do that? So that's a conversation that's having to happen. So that is a challenge that we're all facing, and we're working through that.
Right.
So, okay, and then the last question was around zeroization and storage.
Yeah, so we provide the vehicles for that, but again, product specific.
Okay. So it's up to the products to ensure that they do the zeroization, they do the secure storage.
Right, as appropriate.
Yeah, because that's, oh, go ahead.
That's part of the stuff that I try to take care of when I talk to the business units, because that's a host application thing, but it's still a FIPS requirement. So even though it's maybe something that doesn't happen inside the module, it's a checkbox that they have to make sure they take care of in their own product development. Otherwise, we can't claim FIPS for their product.
Okay.
Kind of like entropy, right?
Yeah, sort of like entropy or something that's outside the bounds of the cryptographic module. So Cisco, not only do we just certify our crypto module, we certify a lot of our hardware modules as well. So like our Cat9K switches, most of our wireless products, we have hardware CMVP search for those. And so, yeah, a lot of back and forth with the BU, especially recently with the switch to FIPS 140-3. We still have BUs who are playing hardball because they're not ready to move to 140-3 yet. So, yeah, lots of headache there. But again, it's one of those, like, if you want to be FIPS compliant, these are the things you have to do. I don't care that you don't like it. Figure it out.
That's where the gap analysis on the front end comes. And even the ones that we're doing 140-2, you still have to gap. There's the new products and new acquisitions, but then you even have to retrain the products you've been doing for years. So as the new requirements come out, that, like we said, we do the library modules so that we can use them across the board, but then a lot of times those are implemented as part of a larger system in our products, and then so we take that entire product through a validation as well. And that's where some of those additional requirements come in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if you look at like the software validations, the zeroization, the storage, that actually all sits in the host application and not inside the library. So, next question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for coming in today and sharing your experiences. You got a very mature organization you should be proud of. One of the things when you're building products around these common modules, often we have to kind of paint ourselves into a corner to get through certification. And that sort of limits the composability that you can have when you're taking a product or a solution through a higher level certification. Do you have any thoughts or perspectives on maybe how we could do things a little differently, or how the standards could change to allow for more reuse to enhance our certification stories?
Okay, so the question, again, Norm, you're on the spot. Really, I thought it was going to be Clint, guys. I'm kind of surprised. Okay, so Norm, the question is, do we have any thoughts on the standards and how they've changed to really allow for reuse? So, because a lot of times we get kind of backed into a corner because of the standards, they make us go a certain way. How have they changed? How are we adapting to it? And thoughts on how we reuse our modules across product lines. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think, ACVP surely plays a big role in certifying the algorithms. What I've seen is when you test against different, operational environments, then you kind of have to spell those out. And I think some of the things that we have done is once we get that list of OEs that we know our products use, that's what we kind of leverage. But as a specific, here's how I don't know if Trish or...
Around reuse, a lot of it is working really closely with the product teams, because we reuse our libraries across product lines, across very, very different. Len and I do not work at all on the same products. We do not talk at all about the same things. He knows a lot of things that I don't, but I know a lot of things he doesn't. The reuse really comes down to what Len and I do, and it's having the conversation to say, okay, this is what the library does, and then this is how you need to implement it, and here's the additional things you need to do. Len, you do wireless. Can you kind of talk about that maybe from your perspective of how you've helped with the reuse across your product teams?
No. Yeah, it's because the module is common, so the module itself doesn't change, right? So like we certify the module, and then the module, for lack of better words, is done outside of any CVE fixes or things like that. So we actually don't change the module again. Norm, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the most part, like when we get our module cert, that's it. And then our BUs, they take the module itself and they integrate it into their platforms. And then from there, it's their job to make sure that their platform works with the module. So we have what we call platform dependent and platform independent code. Our modules are platform independent code. Doesn't matter where it is, it's the same module every time. So yeah, like my wireless BUs, they do things one way. Trish's, switching BUs, they might do things a little different. And I mentioned it earlier, right? FIPS doesn't care how you get there, so long as you get there. And that is a little bit of a pain every once in a while, because in talking to I see what works, and like this made my job really easy. And I talked to this BU, and I'm like, I hate all of you because you're doing this the hardest way you possibly can. But again, it's not our place to tell people what to do. We have to guide them and keep them in line with the requirements.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the operational environment, because that talks about how you build it for that specific CPU or OS, and so once we kind of have a foreknowledge of that, we can put all the right options and parameters in place to build correctly. And that's after that, that's when it's kind of locked down, because once that is shipped off to be certified, then most times the changes are not allowed even in that, because your security policy kind of dictates, you build this way, and that's.
Let me give you a real life story really quick, and then I'll let you talk for a second. Okay. But we're almost out of time, so I'm going to be very fast. The thing is, so I actually have a product team who took the module and was like, we need this one service, which is not FIPS compliant. We need this to work. And so what they did was they actually built an API that actually, for this one non-secure service, it doesn't use the common module. It uses their own, it's a non-approved service. We call it out as a non-approved service. But they did that. And so our job for Len and I is to say, okay, here's what we offer, here's what it does. Now let's talk about how we meet your business needs. And so Len and I get very familiar with the business side of things and understand that, hey, this needs to be a non-secured function, and we've got to make sure that that is clear as we go through the validation. So that's how you get to reuse, is it's all about having this product independent versus product dependent code. But Patty, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and as far as the marketing aspect of our team, as we try to meet with the product teams as soon, especially as we mentioned, Cisco has a lot of acquisitions, so we try to meet them, or now they're starting to come to us as they're aware we're here, and say, we need to get FIPS, or we need this, and and now we're getting more and more cloud offers, so that's another thing. There's a FIPS element to that, so they're like, we don't know what we're doing, or we've been using, we're on some open SSL version from 10 years ago or whatever, so how do we get compliant? So then, we do kind of a meet and greet, we introduce our services, and we meet with people who represent each of the teams. So we come at them as a team and say, here's what we offer, and then We've been continuing, we have a quarterly meeting called Crypto Crew where we do here's what's coming with standards, here's what's coming with requirements, here's the new IGs, here's what it means to you. And then, we have a number of mailers and a number of, like portals and SharePoints where you can go and offer. So we do the outward communication as much as possible and try and get in, and we're working to actually, even with those people we've been working with for years, to get in earlier on their development cycle so that, if they need to get some type of hardware or some kind of module that's a third party, acceleration or whatever, it's like we need to find one that's actually going through a FIPS, validation so that we're also bringing that in. So we're really trying to work in the communication early in the process and then driving them toward, getting the FIPS and reusing what we have to offer. So it's partly an advertising campaign as well.
Yeah, okay, so we only have about 30 seconds left.
I just want to say very quickly, who your lab is matters too, and I'm not here to promote one lab over the other, and that's not what I'm saying, but I think it's part of the vendor's responsibility to talk to the laboratory and say, I need to ethically and creatively make this as portable and modular as possible, but I think you've got to put that into your scoping process so that everybody is looking at it from the same view from the very apex of the effort.
Yeah. Okay, we only have I'm going to ask you all to stay for 2 more minutes if that's all right. Sometimes just story hours run over. Kids run around crazy. It's all good. I saw one more question if you want to ask your question, and then I'm going to ask you guys to just very quickly, I'm going to start with Len at the end. What's your biggest challenge coming up and any last thoughts? So I asked for just a couple more minutes and then I will let you all go, but go ahead.
Yeah, this should be a quick question. Since you have a centralized kind of unit, who owns the claims? And
who owns the what?
The claims. So your product teams make FIPS claims, you sell FIPS claims, you're trying to avoid false claims. Who owns that? Do you guys maintain a database of those claims per product team, or does the product team maintain that? Are they responsible for their white papers that say, we use boring SSL and it's FIPS compliant, but it's not FIPS validated? That type of thing.
Patty, you want to take that?
I think we maintain like a trust portal and a common list and internally that are, here's the products we have that have this or, FIPS or whatever. But then like when they're writing outward documentation, they point to kind of either the public facing documents or, because we do a bunch of level 2s and those actually, point to physical. So those are embedded in the hardware installation guides that, we have FIPS on this and you need to add this to make it FIPS. Ultimately, if there's something comes down to being a misclaim, that'll come back to the security and trust organization. But, it's the product teams and the sales teams that are actually driving the need for those and marketing those claims. But if there's an issue with the claim, it'll come back to us. So
yeah. So that's back to it's a collaboration effort in marketing and messaging. Really fast, Len. What's your biggest challenge coming up, and any last thoughts?
Biggest challenge coming up is just time. Software development is usually 2 years in advance, and then for our new hardware is picked oftentimes many years in advance. And then the CMVP will put out a statement that says, hey, we're not going to allow this anymore, this is changing, and then you run into, well, we've been spending 18 months writing software for something that we can't do anymore. So like SHA-1 going away, I've already told my business units that SHA-1 is going away and they need to start planning for it. And we're 6 years from that, 5 or 6 years from that. So yeah, just time and working with the CMVP, that's the biggest thing. Final thoughts, buy Cisco products.
Clint, biggest challenge, final thoughts.
Biggest challenge, final thoughts.
Oh, I think big challenge, sorry, for those who don't know, I'm severely hearing impaired, so my team's helping me hear the things I'm not hearing. That's what's going on. The big challenges I see is how we evolve from here. I would like to see AMVP. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about what Cisco can do to utilize that to, like I've done with ACVP, trust but verify. But now, even if I don't certify that product, conceivably I can run the whole battery of tests on it. And I know Chris isn't here for me to harass him, but every time I get asked what I'd like to see, I tell Chris Seeley I would like Cisco to be in ESV lab. I mean, he laughs and says, ha, ha, ha. So, that's our challenges that we have now, how we grow and where we go with it.
Awesome. Any final thoughts? All good. Okay. Norm, challenge? Final thoughts.
No challenge. I think it's just exciting, fun times coming up with post-quantum crypto. Yay. And final thoughts, I really love our team, the way we kind of have this DNA of organically just wanting to serve and help one another. And I see that here in this conference. We're all here to kind of learn from one another. We're all across the globe and different companies. And I love that and hope to be a part of, just spreading that out more.
Patty.
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge, in addition to the time, of PQC, how we're going to adapt to that, and keep a common module that's FIPS approvable with PQC algorithms that aren't quite there yet. So, but telling product teams you need to put this in, and then the hardware aspect, I think, is the other piece. Like, how are we going to start doing more hardware validations or acceleration, bring it in, specifically more related to our products. And then it just seems like there's more and more products coming out there needing validations or certifications. So, limited number of people to do all we need to do.
So I want to thank all of you for coming to listen to our story. You could have been over at the AMVP room, but instead you came to listen to us. And as you can see, Norm does not see that PQC is a challenge, so go that. But thank you for listening to our story. We will be around the rest of the day, so if you have any questions, please come ask us. Because like I said, we're a big organization, but these are things that you can do in a small team, and that puts us to the end.
Attestation with Asaf Shan.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone, good morning. Happy to be here. My name is Asaf. I lead the security product management in Qualcomm. And I suspect this is not going to be your typical ICMC session, as neither cryptography nor evaluation is the main theme. I will probably mention both things twice throughout the presentation. But I'm here to talk about deep fakes, how we fight them through provenance attestation, and the challenges and the needs that we see in this space. I do want to emphasize that basically everything that I've been talking about is kind of based on the emergence of artificial intelligence and the impact that it has on kind of all aspects of our lives. Before I kind of go into the details, I want to start with this quotation and, the fact that mankind has been dreaming about artificial intelligence for quite some time, using different terms, obviously. I mean, you can see here the quotation from Aristotle about an instrument doing its own work by intelligent anticipation. That was more than 2,000 years ago. But now that capability is definitely here now. So starting with some kind of background information about AI and generative AI specifically. I mean, AI revolution is kind of here, and it's probably safe to say that it is transformative and it will continue to be transformative. I mean, Gen AI applications are becoming an indispensable part of our lives, and the personal aids, business enablers. I mean, you can see use cases around AI assistants, content creation tools, productivity co-pilots, customer support, education, and the list goes on and on. An interesting fact, according to McKinsey, this is the amount of money Gen AI is estimated to produce in economic benefits annually, and equivalent to the UK GDP in 21, which I find quite amazing. But there is a challenge there. Gen AI is challenging to scale when you consider the cost per inference, the deluge of Gen AI applications, and the number of users. It's becoming quite clear that it is challenging to scale that. There's a Gartner research that indicates that if current AI practices remain unchanged, by 2030, it will account for 3.5% of the global electricity consumption, just for that. So bottom line here is that it is pretty challenging to scale. And in order to achieve that scale, the center of gravity is really trending and moving towards the edge device. I mean, AI inferencing kind of trends towards where the data is originating, which is the edge. And the end game is really a hybrid AI where the cloud and the edge device, whether it's a car, a laptop, a phone, IoT device, are collaborating over some high-performance connectivity to deliver that kind of optimized, efficient AI experience. There is a research by a company called Tirias that is forecasting that moving just 20% of the Gen AI to the edge device will produce by 2028 already $16 billion or more cost saving on data center costs. There are good reasons to move to the edge device, at least part of that workload. I mean, you get performance increase and immediacy. You kind of remove the need for that round trip to the cloud. Privacy and security, the user data never leaves the device. There's an option to personalize the model based on user and device contextual kind of background. And as I mentioned, cost is going down. And again, bear in mind that we are talking here about models that are very capable, still billions of parameters that are deployed on that edge device. Okay, given these advantages that I've just mentioned around power, around security and other KPIs, we see very positive response from the industry to that kind of on-edge deployment of Gen AI models. It starts with the OEM first, like OEM models, but we see a lot more is coming, and there's definitely appetite to enable kind of the broader ecosystem beyond the device OEMs to run on those kind of edge devices. Now, just for context, I've been talking about kind of the importance of enabling AI at the edge and how capable the edge device is in this context, because it is the edge device that captures media, whether it's audio, video, images, and the presence of this very potent AI functionality plays a role in the context of deepfakes, which I promise I'll get there in a few slides. But before we go into that, well, first I hope I kind of established that AI is revolutionary, and it is, the edge plays a role and will continue to play a big role in that. And before we go into the deepfakes, I wanted to share just for fun a quick demo in the context of visual media, so generation of images from scratch. The camera is not involved there. It uses our premium mobile SoC under the hood and using LoRa class of models, and just to kind of demonstrate how this is done using a prompt and some additional parameters. Let's see. Okay, there's no volume. Well, we don't need that. But you can see here that the prompt is a cute curly cat. And first, the adapter is set to none, so it should yield a realistic picture. Hopefully it did. Now I think it is changing to crystals. So different LoRa adapter, and again from scratch, well, I guess a crystals cat is generated. And naturally the next adapter there is noodles. So it will produce, I guess, your standard noodles cat. So anyway, that's kind of a quick demo of that. And now let's switch to the dark side of AI. And let's talk about deepfakes. So what are deepfakes? I mean, in general, it's kind of a machine-generated high-quality change in some aspect of a piece of media, right? In a manner that the human sensors cannot, it's not discernible for human sensors and to many tools, and that's part of the challenge. So, you know, it can be a clone of your voice, it can be a video of you saying something you never did, it can be an image that the camera actually sensed and captured that is perfectly modified, or something that was never, like, that was not coming through the camera sensor, as the example I just gave. And the key issue here, it really challenges the kind of the fabric of trust once we cannot trust any of our natural sensors. I'm pretty sure I'm not breaking any news here. These deepfakes are happening all around us. This is a very, very small subset and random collection of things happening in 2024. I'm sure you all know a lot more is out there and has been published, and a lot more is happening and will be coming. Okay, so legislators are definitely taking notice of this, and relevant legislation starts to emerge. I'm giving here two examples. The AI Act from the EU and the Safe AI executive order from the White House from last year. And across all these efforts, the need to label content source accurately and correctly is kind of the key common message. Okay, so between these new legislations and regulations and the prevalence of deep fakes that we see out there, there are global efforts going on to fight that phenomena. Now, AI watermarking and other detection techniques are definitely part of that portfolio, and so is attestation to the content provenance and authenticity. And the C2PA, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, has issued a standard that aimed at allowing a relying party, it can be a user, it can be an enterprise, to verify and identify the source and history of a piece of media. Again, the spec talks about images, video. It's kind of media agnostic. It can be audio, video, images, even text documents, and so on. So basically, it's an open standard that for storing and accessing verifiable and tamper-evident metadata information about the digital asset. And as you can see, that coalition is getting traction. There are a lot of big companies across multiple industries, not just technology, that are part of that. Since that slide was prepared, by the way, AWS also joined as a steering committee member. And the rest of my talk is really focused now on aspects of implementing this kind of provenance and authenticity attestation method, and some of the challenges that are inherent in the kind of spec as we see them. Both implementation and spec challenges. Okay, so the first question is, how does it work? Well, the viewer experience is pretty simple here. I mean, the viewer simply scrolls over that content credential kind of icon, and a digital nutrition label is revealed with information about the underlying media. That content credential, like an icon of transparency, was introduced by the C2PA. It's really aimed at giving creators, marketeers, consumers a signal of how trustworthy is the digital content that it refers to. So what you see here on the screen, hopefully you can see the screen, on the left-hand side is kind of the metadata, the formatting of the metadata that is accompanying a piece of media. So there is a notion of a claim, which is what any entity adds to the to the media. And that claim has different data elements called assertions. These assertions can be like who is the publisher or creator of the image, when and where it was created, what tools were used to create that, whether generative AI was involved under the hood, and this is where it gets pretty detailed and tricky. The IPTC, which is the kind of the global standards body for the news media, is defining like 14 different types of digital sources, and AI is involved in several of them in different manners. It can include like thumbnail of the original image, any edits, the type of edits that were made, so a lot of kind of additional information about the kind of the piece of media. And of course there's cryptographic content binding. So yeah, and another point that it is important to notice is that privacy preservation is part of the spec, so anything that is identity related is completely optional and up to the users. Now, in terms of the cryptographic foundation there, so I do get to mention cryptography, there's hard binding between the asset and the metadata. So basically, if we're talking about an image, for example, which is the example given on the right-hand side, mapping of this format, the image is hashed using any of the SHA-2 algorithms. The overall claim is signed using, I think, both elliptic curve, RSA, and also the Edward curve, the 25519 is approved. And then keys are issued using X509 certificates. And there is the C2PA is working on the concept of a trust list, kind of the trust anchors behind that. There's also a nice notion of soft binding, meaning if that metadata got stripped out of the media file, because at the end of the day, it's something that can be removed, assuming it was stored somewhere, then that metadata can be recovered later on in the process. And then at the end of the day, a nutrition label is shown to the user. It shows only the verified information. So basically, people know what they see. And bear in mind that at the end of the day, trust is really a human decision. based on a series of signals, and that's exactly what the CTPA is aiming to provide, these signals helping with that decision-making process. Let's talk about the media path. So the CTPA kind of assumes that every entity throughout the chain, from the capturing device all the way to the viewer, anyone performing any type of editing is CTPA equipped or enabled. So all entities that perform any type of edit, whether it's a newsroom or the back end of some social media service, everyone can add a claim, sign the claim, and add the claim to the to the manifest store. And of course, this is done after verification of the incoming image. So basically, all the entities throughout the chain need to maintain a key, a secret signing key to perform their role. Then at the end device, the viewer device, all these signatures will be verified, and this digital nutrition label will be formatted and shown to the user. And I will get to that media path and some of the challenges associated with that in a few slides. Okay. Yeah, so obviously, we will kind of continue to equip the edge devices that are using our Snapdragon with, what we believe is best-in-class Gen AI capabilities. But we know that we have to address the abuse potential that is coming, the deepfake abuse potential. And we've decided to pre-integrate a CTPA implementation into our products. Now, bear in mind that legislation is really focused on labeling AI-generated content. And of course, this is useful and this is needed, but it's not just the enhanced Gen AI capabilities on the edge device that justify the existence of that agent there. At the end of the day, the edge device is the one capturing all kind of real-life media, whether it's audio, video, images, and we feel it's crucial to correctly label also that. So yet another good reason to kind of have that agent there to label all types of content, whether they are authentic or synthetic. Now, we wanted to set the bar higher, so we wanted to make sure that, or achieve an assurance level that even beyond what the high-level OS can offer, so even in the presence of a compromised OS, at least some aspects can be protected, the signing key and some of the assertions that are added into that metadata. So we kind of implemented that within a trusted execution environment, being a more trustworthy environment and with a smaller kind of attack surface. So I want to draw your attention to something specific in the spec, in the CTPA spec, and it's part of the goals and non-goals of that standard, and I'll just read it aloud. It is important to highlight that content credentials do not provide value judgments about whether a given set of provenance data is true, but instead merely whether the provenance information can be verified as associated with the underlying asset, well-formed, and free from tampering. The thing is that this is not necessarily enough for some relying parties that are out there. If you consider insurance companies that want to process claims online, or if you consider identity verifiers that have to go through that formal process as part of KYC and anti-money laundering, all kind of regulated processes that need to be complied with. So they definitely seek truthful assertions under the hood. So besides the kind of the assurance that once signed, things are not tampered with, they would definitely like to see also kind of relatively high assurance to the extent possible that the different assertions, for example, what is the source of that image? Was it downloaded? Was it taken by the camera? Was it generated? Like that source is labeled correctly, what time it was taken, location, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what is it? What is the evolution that we seek toward this higher assurance and truthful assertions, not just that once signed it is not tampered with? Let's start with kind of the current implementations to the extent that they exist. It's still very kind of early days. So typically, I mean, you have the camera sensor there on the left-hand side. It goes to some hardware that applies basic processing over that raw image that is coming in. Then you have the camera application and underlying software layers that apply quite a lot of kind of logic and manipulate the result. And then it goes into that claims generator, which is actually the C2PA-defined component that formats the metadata, collects the assertions from, I'll get to that in a second, and use the private key to sign that image. And then you have, I'm using image here as an example, but it's the same thing for other like modalities, and sign that metadata. Now, as mentioned earlier, what we basically did, we moved the last stage into a TEE. So now the key is handled in a much more robust and like secure environment. Some assertions are also created in that environment. But as you can see, the content itself, the image, for example, is still handed over from the OS. So by definition, there is some trust in the OS to kind of label it correctly once it hands the content to be signed and to state where is it coming from. But as mentioned earlier, this is not enough in some use cases. And the goal, ideally, the goal is really a kind of trustworthy, beyond, not exposed to the OS, full path from sensor to signed media. So where everything is handled, processed, formatted outside kind of the reach of a potentially compromised OS. No offense to my Google friends in the crowd here. Yeah, so basically with that, this will kind of assure only images coming from the camera sensor are indeed labeled as coming from the camera sensor, as opposed to other options. So first question comes to mind, okay, how hard can that be? Like why isn't that straightforward? Well, it can be pretty tricky to protect that entire path. I mean, if you consider a modern mobile SoC, there are a lot of many processing environments with their own hardware, firmware, OS that is potentially running in these environments, the application-related payload that was, for example, offloaded to some accelerator, and so on and so forth. And given that we want neither synthetic content to be presented as real, nor real content to be labeled as the perfect Gen AI, it means that we need to include quite a lot of kind of scope in that path, because we want all the relevant subsystems that have the potential of applying harm to be kind of protected or at a higher assurance level. And that translates that if all of that needs to go into a TE, the T in that TE is really becoming questionable, because you've just added a huge attack surface into that environment. So, and this is getting even kind of more trickier, and when you consider like more complicated processing scenarios, like if you consider auto HDR for picture taking, like you need now to combine several frames to maximize the dynamic range in order to create that result. Or if you consider the bokeh, the blurring kind of use case, where again, a lot of software needs to be applied, which that software I would claim is considered benign, not harmful. It doesn't change, and I'll get to, there's actually a definition of what's benign versus not out there. But again, the point is that inclusion of the full path in that kind of higher assurance level is really tricky. And now once you consider the nature of the C2PA, where assertions about time, location, the type of equipment, a lot of information needs to be added now to that, whatever, audio, image, video. Again, you have even more parts of the SoC that are now part of the scope that requires protection. So yeah, so the sensor to sign media path is really tricky, and to kind of do that at a higher assurance level with still a reasonable attack surface. Okay, so on top of this technical complexity of getting sensor to sign media path at that high assurance level, I wanted to mention some additional complexities that are in this context, especially if we add these, like we create multiple levels of assurance here beyond like one that covers everything. So first challenge is, how do we indicate these different levels of trustworthiness? Because it is really at the assertion level. Like the key can be handled within a TEE. The location information can be coming also through some trustworthy path, but the image itself maybe is not, or some other assertions are not. So it's really becoming a decision on assertion by assertion basis. Another challenge I want to kind of highlight here is that how do we provide assurance about the implementation, especially if you have multiple levels? So that calls for some evaluation framework in this context, which is still not there. And the third one is really about the user. How do you present all that to the user in a meaningful manner? I mean, at the end of the day, it needs to be really simple for the user to make anything out of that. Okay. So I've been really focusing on the edge device that is capturing the digital media, for example, or generating the image for understandable reasons. And I hope we establish that it can be beneficial if it uses more hardware under the hood. But I want to zoom out and talk about the whole media path. And the claim here is that the C2PA is really as strong as the weakest element in the chain. And the thing is that there's always a chain. Photos are rarely published as is. Now, there is typically some service backend or newsroom that applies some form of editing, whether it's before it kind of posts that, whether it's some faces and objects might be blurred, the image might be cropped, downsized for bandwidth, it can be turned into grayscale for whatever reason, but typically there are these changes. And the Associated Press has defined a list of allowed changes that are not considered malicious, that are not fundamentally changing the content of the photo, for example. So even if the editing application is this intermediary in the middle is C2PA compliant, now the end user needs to trust that intermediary, and it needs to trust that the implementation and the signing key and everything there is trustworthy. And the thing is, you don't get a history of the actual media. So once that intermediary is done with its editing, the original media is discarded. It's not becoming part of the kind of what it outputs. So hence the claim that at the end of the day, what the viewer sees, it's as trusted as the weakest element in that chain. Okay, so what is it that we want for this like multi-hops media path to do, ideally? We would like the original unedited photo to be properly signed, and ideally in some hardware-based environment. We want only permissible edits to be applied, and we want the original metadata that was created along with the media itself to be preserved all the way to the viewer device. So that would be kind of ideal. And enters zero knowledge. Hold on, something got wrong here. Bear with me. Okay. Zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge. So really rolls off the tongue, and I just mentioned that as snark or ZK snark. So basically, usage of these snarks allow avoiding kind of the need to trust the middleman. It enables the editor, that intermediary, to make modifications to a captured image, a C2PA image, and replace the C2PA signature with a ZK snark proof. And that snark-based proof allows the verifier to check whether permissible changes were made over the original properly signed image and still view the original metadata that was there. The resulting proof is succinct in the sense that it can be verified. It's short and it's relatively fast to verify. Zero knowledge here means that sensitive information in the original image can be blurred, removed, and modified while still allowing a valid proof. And yeah, the kind of the viewer device can verify automatically, the browser can verify automatically this proof. And the Stanford Computer Security Lab actually built a system, they call it Veritas, that is using these snark-based proof systems, and they can prove images at a realistic size of like 30 megapixels or I believe even more. So how does this snark work? How is it that a proof like that can be constructed over like a pretty complex statement and the result is pretty fast? Well, for this you will have to go and look at the papers from Stanford and other publishers. Basically, it is the idea that you don't need to apply these checks systematically throughout the entire set of data. You can use a really small set of out of that data. But the important part is that the resulting proof is both complete, meaning if the original image was properly signed, a proof can be constructed and can be verified. And if the original, and it's also, this proof is also sound in the sense that if the original image was not valid, even a malicious editor cannot construct a proof that will be verified later on. So that's kind of, it removes the need to trust that middleman. So my last slide, some kind of takeaways here. So attesting to the media provenance is a useful tool in fighting deep fakes, and C2PA is trying to do exactly that. We believe that the edge device that is capturing the media should be, that process should be hardware-based to the extent we can. But covering the full range from sensor to signed media is a pretty high bar and pretty, it's tricky. Now, given the typical media processing chain that I've just mentioned, the current challenge is that the media presented to the end user is really as strong as the weakest link. And such proof systems like the zero-knowledge snark one can actually bridge this gap and allow to avoid trust in that intermediary, which can be, again, a backend of a social media service or someone else. And with that, I'll say thank you, and hopefully it was interesting.